San Francisco burned for 3 days straight. Over 3,000 people died in the rubble. But the earthquake lasted only 60 seconds. What happened in those 60 seconds on April 18, 1906 was catastrophic. What happened in the 3 days after was even worse. City officials lied about the death toll. The military shot civilians in the streets. Fire chiefs made decisions that burned down entire neighborhoods on purpose. And the mayor issued a shoot-to-kill order for anyone caught outside. This wasn't just a natural disaster. This was a cover-up that lasted over a century. The official death toll was 478 people. The real number was at least 3,000. Nobody knew the truth until researchers started digging through unmarked graves in 2005. The United States government helped bury the evidence. Insurance companies refused to pay out claims. And San Francisco's elite rebuilt their fortunes while thousands of poor immigrants disappeared from the records entirely. This is what really happened. April 18, 1906. 5:12 in the morning. Most of San Francisco was asleep. The city had 400,000 people living in wooden buildings packed tight together. It was the 9th largest city in America. The jewel of the West Coast. Then the ground started moving. The San Andreas Fault ruptured for 296 miles. The earthquake measured 7.9 on the Richter scale. But that scale didn't exist yet. Witnesses said the ground moved in waves 6 feet high. Buildings swayed like trees in wind. Then they collapsed. The shaking lasted 60 seconds. In that minute, the City Hall dome crashed through 7 floors. The Valencia Street Hotel pancaked, trapping 80 guests between floors. Survivors heard screaming from inside the rubble. Fire Chief Dennis Sullivan was asleep in his firehouse apartment when the chimney collapsed through his bedroom. He fell 3 stories with the debris. Sullivan was the one man who knew how to fight fires in San Francisco. He had a plan for exactly this scenario. But here's what nobody talks about. Sullivan was dying from his injuries. And without him, the city was about to make the worst decision in firefighting history. The fires had already started. 50 fires ignited in the first hour. Gas lines ruptured. Chimneys fell through houses. Candles and stoves set wooden buildings ablaze. The fire department responded immediately. Then they discovered something terrifying. The water mains were destroyed. Every single one. The earthquake had shattered the pipes underground. Firefighters connected their hoses to hydrants and nothing came out. Fire Chief Sullivan died 3 days later without regaining consciousness. His replacement was a politician with no firefighting experience. And he made a call that destroyed the city. They decided to create fire breaks by dynamiting entire blocks of buildings. The theory was sound. Blow up the buildings in the fire's path. Create a gap it can't cross. But nobody in charge knew how to use dynamite properly. Lieutenant Frederick Funston of the U.S. Army took control. Funston wasn't waiting for orders from Washington. He declared martial law without authority. He had none. But he commanded troops at the Presidio military base and he deployed them anyway. Soldiers marched into the streets with rifles and orders to shoot looters on sight. Mayor Eugene Schmitz made it official at 2 p.m. Proclamation by the mayor, shoot to kill any person engaged in looting. Here's what nobody expected. The dynamite made everything worse. Soldiers used too much explosive. They used it wrong. Buildings didn't collapse cleanly. They exploded into fireballs. Burning debris flew hundreds of feet and started new fires. The fire breaks became fire accelerants. Block after block that survived the earthquake was now burning because of the army. And in neighborhoods like Chinatown and the working-class Mission District, soldiers weren't just fighting fires. They were forcing people out at gunpoint. What they found next was even more disturbing. The city burned for 72 hours. By April 21st, over 28,000 buildings were gone. 80% of San Francisco was ash. Nearly 250,000 people were homeless. Refugee camps filled Golden Gate Park and the Presidio. But the bodies didn't add up. The official count said 478 people died. Researchers knew that was impossible. In 2005, historian Gladys Hansen published the real findings. She spent 20 years tracking death certificates, unmarked graves, and missing person reports. Her count, at least 3,000 dead. Probably more. Why did the city lie? Money. Insurance companies were looking for any excuse not to pay. Earthquake damage wasn't covered by most policies. Fire damage was. So city officials and business leaders created a narrative. They claimed the earthquake did minimal damage. They said the fire caused all the destruction. That way, insurance companies had to pay out claims. But it was still a lie. The Southern Pacific Railroad needed investors to keep funding California development. A massive death toll would scare them away. So the railroad pressured newspapers to downplay the casualties. Real estate developers wanted people to move back. A city of death wouldn't attract new residents. Here's the darkest part. Poor immigrants and Chinese residents weren't counted at all. Chinatown burned completely. Thousands lived there. The official record claims almost none of them died. That's because they weren't considered worth counting. Bodies in Chinatown were buried in mass graves with no records. The city rebuilt Chinatown in a new location and pretended the old residents never existed. In the Mission District, working-class Irish and German families met the same fate. Soldiers shot at least a dozen people for looting. Some were just trying to rescue belongings from their own homes. Those deaths never made it into any official report. And the military destroyed the records. Lieutenant Funston was never court-martialed for declaring unauthorized martial law. He was promoted. Nobody ever faced consequences for the cover-up. San Francisco rebuilt in 3 years. The 1915 Panama Pacific Exposition showcased the new city to the world. But the lies stayed buried for a century. The 1906 earthquake taught engineers how to build safer structures. Building codes changed nationwide because of it. But it also taught governments how to control disaster narratives. The same playbook appeared again after Hurricane Katrina. Official death tolls stayed low for months while bodies floated in attics. After the Camp Fire in 2018, Paradise officials delayed releasing casualty numbers. The pattern repeats. Protect the investors. Protect the real estate values. Minimize the human cost. San Francisco sits on the San Andreas Fault today. The next big earthquake isn't a question of if. It's when. Seismologists say the Bay Area has a 72% chance of a magnitude 6.7 or greater quake before 2043. The buildings are stronger now. The water system has backups. But the people in charge are still the same type who covered up 1906. If a story like this kept you glued here, subscribe. We drop a new untold chapter of American history every single day. And if you think the 1906 cover-up was bad, wait until you hear what the government buried after the Johnstown flood killed 2,200 people in 1889. That story is even darker. Subscribe and hit the bell for a new untold story every day.